LightCasting. Hi, sweet souls. Welcome to I'm Awake, Now What? A podcast investigating the intersectionality of spirituality, healing, and personal development. I'm your host, Krista Xiomara. Rack up some good karma by leaving a 5-star rating and write a review if you're enjoying the show and tell your friends about it. This week, I sit down with New York Times bestselling author and co-host of the Awareness Explorers podcast, Jonathan Robinson. Jonathan has met and interviewed all our modern-day spiritual giants, seeking their wisdom and unique messages about enlightenment, gratitude, awakening, and integration. In his book, The Enlightenment Project, How I Went from Depressed to Blessed, and You Can Too, he shares stories of what he learned from his encounters with people such as the Dalai Lama, Byron Katie, Deepak Chopra, and the late Mother Teresa and Ram Dass. In our interview, he discusses the power of meditation and plant medicine, and how love is who we are. Hi, Jonathan. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, I'm very excited, Krista.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you here. My first question is always to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself to the listening audience in your own words about who you are and what you do before we get into the meat of this interview.
I was a very depressed, suicidal teenager due to being in a very dysfunctional family. So I kind of had a midlife crisis at age 12, which led me to self-help books, and I got into hypnosis and meditation by age 13, and kind of developed the hobby of trying to find ways that would heal myself, and found that most things don't work, but every now and then something did work. And then I kind of got into the hobby of finding the best psychological and spiritual leaders on the planet who I could meet potentially and find out what they knew. So I met everybody from the late Mother Teresa, Ram Dass, and Wayne Dyer to Deepak Chopra, Dalai Lama, and probably anybody you may have heard. And I got into really the career of interviewing these people, writing books about the wisdom and methods they offered. And then, Oprah liked my stuff, so I sold a lot of books that way. And just recently came out with what I think is my best book that kind of summarizes all the greatest hits of what I've learned is this book called The Enlightenment Project, which is trying to give people the best methods, the best ideas, and also my favorite stories about hanging out with spiritual gurus and teachers.
That's really wonderful. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about that a little bit more. Your book is really wonderful. The second question is about everybody's spiritual, religious or non-religious upbringing, what they were brought up in, and then how they found the path that they're on right now. So what was that story for you? What were you plunked into or not plunked into as a child? And then how did you end up coming on this path of spirituality and obviously meeting all these wonderful people along the way?
Well, a lot of people enter the spiritual path either through a crisis, like, I was very depressed, or often through psychedelics, which when depressed, that's one of the things that helped me on the path at first, was realizing there's something more than meets the eye. And then just trying a lot of different methods, reading a lot of books, meeting a lot of people, and saying, okay, what really works? I call it an experimental attitude, like, well, I'll try this for a month and see if that works. I'll try this teacher for a month or what this book says for a week and see if that works. And over time, you do learn, certain things work for you, certain things don't. And through your lived experience, you start to change. Mm-hmm. So, I was with one teacher for 26 years just because he kept on teaching me new things and I thought it was great. But I haven't really belonged to any particular path. I'm more like, well, let's take a little bit of here and this works now. And that's an interesting idea like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The book that you wrote is called The Enlightenment Project, How I Went from Depressed to Blessed, and You Can Too. Can we tell the audience before we get into the meat of this book and what it's about, why did you write this book? What were you hoping to accomplish in writing it? And like you mentioned, it's sort of, before we were recording, is a kind of a consolidation of all of these works and touch points with these people. What is the Enlightenment Project?
Well, I think we're all on an enlightenment project, whether we know it or not, going from being based in a little ego to trying to be based more in our soul or our awareness or our ability to come from love. So, that's the project we're all on. And I wanted to give kind of the greatest hits that I've discovered. I've been very fortunate that I got to meet over 100 spiritual leaders and talk to them personally and become friends with many of them. So I felt like an obligation. Not many people get to live that life. And I was just very fortunate. I thought I'd put the best gems in one book because I'm kind of lazy, Krista, and I don't like to read a whole lot myself. So I thought, let's put all the best ideas in one book and see if we can get some of these best ideas and methods out to a larger audience. And that's what really motivated me to write that particular book.
Well, I might have to disagree with you on the laziness because I think you've written like 14 books, haven't you? So.
Yeah, I have. Well, writing comes easy, so luckily I've been very fortunate to be good at that particular skill.
And you've been like all over the place. So although this is our first time meeting, I might have to delightfully disagree with you there.
Okay.
Thank you for going into that. So I thought we'd unpack the book in the same order that it is, and starting out with having an experimental attitude, which I think is very similar to how I feel about curiosity being a spiritual practice in and of itself. And then when the student is ready, meaning like as you begin this awakening process, and like what does that look like? What do you mean about having an experimental attitude on this life path? What does that actually mean for someone reading your book?
Well, it means that you are willing to fully commit to something for a short period of time. I was a Buddhist monk for a little bit. I was a Hindu monk for a little bit. I was a Christian monk for a little bit, just to see what's there. And also really committing to a particular technique. So, as you know, in the Enlightenment Project, I offer probably 40 different spiritual techniques. And, a lot of people are using techniques from 2,000 years ago, but the techniques that really get us to a place of love and peace and bliss are really changing like any technology. So there's a lot of methods that have only been invented in the last 5 years that work a lot better than the ones that, the Buddha or Jesus taught.
Yeah.
So being willing to experiment with them and see, oh my God, that, I did that for a minute and a half and made my head explode. That's pretty good. So only if you're constantly discovering, constantly experimenting and open to new ideas do you come across stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it is interesting in terms of evolution. Sometimes it feels like the more different varieties of awakening and becoming on this path have opened up to be a lot more expansive than, like you said, in Jesus's time and the Buddha's. And it's interesting that even just like in the 50s and 40s, people had a very bad taste in their mouth about psychedelics and even transcendental meditation in the Western world. And there are all these other entry points that we can take along this journey if we're open, which I think is the first big step to the awakening process, is being open to discovering what is actually out there.
The other key is your level of hunger, your level of intention in learning. I share a funny story in the book about, I used to be like a spiritual teacher for about 30 people, and we would show profound movies, movies like Schindler's List or something. And one of the movies I was going to show to this group was the movie Gandhi. But one week I wasn't going to be there, so I gave what I thought was the movie Gandhi to a friend to show to this group. And it was actually the movie Men in Black 2. Mm-hmm. Have you seen Men in Black 2, Krista?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, Men in Black 1 and 3 were pretty good. Men in Black 2 was so bad, even Will Smith said, I don't think you should watch this movie. That it wasn't a good movie, let's say. But this group was so used to thinking that any movie I showed them was profound that when they watched it, they all wrote glowing reviews about how this movie just taught them so many lessons and changed their life. Which was really their intention to learn was more important than the actual inanity of the movie.
Yeah.
And I think that's why the statement, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, is true. If you're hungry enough, the teacher might be your cat or dog or your neighbor or a book or anything. So I encourage people to become more open to learning and more open to experimenting. And then who you get as a teacher doesn't make that big of a difference.
And I also have found too, in I would say my last 10 years, is I think there's all of these really beautiful opportunities for profoundness in experiences when you're open, and you do find these teachers along the way that have done the work, that are like living in the behind scenes of life, and you have these encounters that are really beautiful. And to your point, like I do feel like there's all these teachers along the way, and even our animals too, for sure. I feel like all of the animals I've ever owned, I feel like have taught me something really special by their personality that I needed to learn in this whole process of life. So I think that's really interesting that you said that as well.
You may not know this, but my only novel that I ever wrote was called Conversations with Dog. It's about a talking dog that teaches his owner how to love and play and enjoy life again. And I think sometimes our animals are like that. There are living gurus who are trying to teach us, hey, just be present, let go, have fun, take a nap, whatever.
And I feel like, I don't know if it's like the chicken or the egg or what has come first, but the one thing, it feels like the two animals that I've had sort of mirrored my time and space in life. And that's been really wonderful. And it's been also a teacher in and of itself, like seeing them respond to how different my life is and stuff. So it's just really interesting. But we don't have to go off on the animal tangent because we have so much to cover here. There's a chapter in your book that I think is really beautiful called Deconditioning and Letting Go of Triggers. A lot of people that come to this podcast talk about their healing experiences, becoming undomesticated, unconditioned, like whatever it is that you want to call this thing. For you, how important was that on your journey? And in the book, what are you trying to point to in letting go and deconditioning for the reader?
Well, one thing that surprised me as I interviewed enlightened people was that even after people have major awakenings, and even famous teachers like Deepak Chopra or Adyashanti or Byron Katie, they still have old conditioned patterns that can affect their life. And certainly that's true for me, that even though I've had many awakenings, I still have patterns that, I still get impatient. I still get annoyed if somebody's smoking a cigarette in my face and other things, the world's in a difficult position. Some of the politics bothers me. And part of our job, as I see it, is to allow things to be as they are while also, being able to change things externally. So, I volunteer in prisons and I do a lot of work, including building hospitals in other countries to help refugees. So I'm actively involved in the world, but I'm also actively involved in trying to become more free of conditioned patterns that are still with me, fear of failure, fear of disapproval, all the things that human beings have that are like a bag of heavy rocks on them. And as you let go of some of those things, you feel freer, and you're also more able to serve more effectively because you're no longer so needy. And in the book, I talk about various methods I've come across for deconditioning that I think are easy enough that anybody can do them without a therapist. Therapists, I am a therapist, but therapists charge money, and not everybody has a lot of money. So knowing these easy methods for letting go of your triggers, letting go of conditioned habits can be really helpful.
Yeah, I think you raise a really good point, because sometimes even being able to get to our healing, sometimes it feels insurmountable at times, and not being able to afford like quote unquote professional help. But we do have, I think, internally a lot of resources and externally resources through books and things and other people's experiences to show us and shine a light on how to heal our past trauma, which a lot of us are living with. And we don't even know it until we go on this path and realize, I don't have to carry this around anymore. I can let go of this. I can leave this where it belongs, and I can still live a full and meaningful life regardless of what happened to me, which I think is really beautiful. And I love that a lot of our gurus and our healers are all teaching us to do that. I think that's part of the human experience is making sure that we fully embody ourselves by letting all of that go. Not that we ever forget it or that it didn't hurt us or anything, because I don't want to sound like I'm bypassing or anything right here, but I think that's really important that you said that.
You talk about trauma. I was beaten up a lot by my stepfather as a kid. And so when I see, like I might be in the supermarket and I'll see a 3-year-old getting hit by their parent, and it brings up stuff in me. And as I interviewed a lot of enlightened people, you might know I have a podcast called Awareness Explorers. I interview well-known teachers, and I asked them what was one of the biggest things that allowed them to get past their trauma. And I found it interesting that almost all of them gave me the same answer. And the answer was very simple. When their fear or trauma or whatever or those feelings that arise from it, what they do is they take a minute and they send love to that part of them. By loving it, by accepting it, by being empathetic with whatever arises, that those parts of us that have been traumatized tend to like disperse or dissipate.
Yeah.
And then there's healing that happens.
Not to go too much off on a tangent, the thing that is interesting too is the identity that we layer onto ourselves from that trauma, and that like our ego gets attached to as well, and allowing ourselves the luxury of letting that identity go and sort of quieting the ego at the same time. Do you have anything to say about that as well?
Well, I agree that, some people get very attached to their victim identity. Really, our real identity is just as awareness, as a presence, as a loving, compassionate, peaceful presence. And our journey is to soften holding on to that identity, which makes us very limited, and let go into this broader, spacious identity, which is always here, but we need to learn how to relax the muscle or the constriction that we normally are. And when you do that, things are great. I think of it as two channels. On channel 2, there's you and me and the world of politics and pain and difficulty. But on channel 1, where everything's connected, it's always good. So I go back and forth between channel 1 and channel 2 many times a day. And, channel 2 is kind of fun. It's win, lose, right, wrong, who's popular, who's not, all that stuff in the material world. But channel 1, once you learn to tune into it, it's a really nice place to hang out.
Yeah, I really like that, you saying that with the channels. I think that's a great way of understanding it. One thing that I always thought was really funny when I started out this journey, I left like my religion of origin and kind of fell into an ashram and did the whole spiritual expedition and tried to find out as much as I could about everything before Christ, basically. But in the beginning, like people would tell me the purpose of us here is to love each other and find our interconnectedness through love. And I just always thought it was so cheesy. I always just thought I just thought it was too simple. Like this answer is just too simple. And then obviously found along the way is like the more you let go of, the more you allow your ego to step back, the more you uncondition and undomesticate yourself, and you get to like the core of who you are, which is love. And I just always think it's funny that I was like, no, that just seems like too simple of an answer, because you mentioned that back there.
Simple but not easy.
Yes. That's a great way of saying it. So you do a lot of work with what you call spirit medicine in the book, which I'll let you define what that is in a moment. Mm-hmm. But you've also have a mindfulness and a meditation practice. And if we're thinking about those two things, if we want to expand on what you said about, entry points into awakening and enlightenment, it's not just binary anymore. There are all these options. Mm-hmm. In terms of imagining meditation and spirit medicine together, I'm sure one is not better than the other. For you, both of those things, how would you sort of allocate them in trying to wake up and to keep this process of unfolding in the human experience?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the tenets of the book, The Enlightenment Project, is that different people need different things at different times.
Yeah.
So I've been lucky that I was able to academically research. My master's thesis was on the therapeutic effects of MDMA, better known as ecstasy, on PTSD. And I got to see that, wow, this really can solve most people's trauma in like one day. And that got me interested in things like LSD and magic mushrooms and iboga and 5-MeO-DMT. There's a lot of what could be called spirit medicines out there now. I think that they're easy to abuse, so you got to be really careful. But they're also can be helpful if used the right way, just like a meditation can be helpful if used the right way.
Right.
So sometimes I will help people with journeys, where they're on the medicine, and I guide them into very deep places with different spirit medicines. And sometimes I'll microdose some for myself, meaning take a very small amount of mushrooms or something like that, because they can facilitate going deeper within. And, Jesus said the kingdom of heaven's within, everything's within, and we just have to find really good tools to get in there, remove the old gunk, and then polish the jewel that's inside. And these medicines are, society or our culture, our culture goes through various opinions about these things. They're terrible, they're great, they're terrible, they're great. But, if used the right way, they can be useful. If used the wrong way, they can be detrimental.
Yeah. I know there's sometimes judgment around people using the psychedelics to kind of fast forward through trauma or bypassing an experience or trying to get a more awakened. What do you feel about that? I think what you're saying here is both things are useful, right?
Well, rather than use them to skip a step, I would say use them to explore what's in the way of your next step. So let's say you have a big fear of disapproval from other people. You might take a microdose of something, a very small dose, like 1/10 the normal dose, and that might help you to explore, what is this obstacle? Why am I so afraid? Or why am I mad at my mother, or whatever it is. It can be kind of therapeutic in that way. Can you use these medicines to avoid stuff? Yeah, it's kind of like a hammer is very useful if you have a nail in front of you, but if you have your finger in front of you, a hammer is not useful for, pounding your finger. So these powerful things have to be used very carefully, and their abuse can happen. But if you have a sincere desire and intention as to why you're using them and you don't abuse them, they can be useful, just like different meditation techniques can be very useful.
Yeah, that's a very important point. And is there anything that we need to say? I know I've read articles for people who do have like mental illness in their family. Would this be something they would maybe not do? Or is it still safe to do if you have that in your family history?
Well, I think it really depends on how grounded and good you feel. And also dosage is really important. Some people are very stupid when it comes to doses. You just take a huge amount and they expect there won't be a problem. If you are going to experiment with this stuff, you have to be aware that most of these things are illegal, although now they're becoming more legal in some states. But, start really small and see how that feels. Do an experiment that way rather than dive into the ocean and hope that you don't drown.
Yeah. And probably do it with a guide, somebody who is very well versed in it, like yourself, to somebody who can help them through that process. I know I've read that a couple of times that it could be potential, I'm not sure how it sort of manifests if there's mental illness, like schizophrenia or bipolar, anything like that.
Those would certainly be things to make you more cautious.
Yeah, for sure. So it's really interesting. And as far as meditation, I just wanted to pick your brain a little bit deeper on this. But when we think about meditation as a whole, and it's become so mainstream now, thankfully, like everyone sort of knows what it is and they know what it's about. It's interesting too that people still, I think, have a very specific idea of how meditation should be and how you should feel when you're doing it. For you, do you feel beholden to anything specific, or are you of the mindset that if you can even just sit in your own stillness and clear your thoughts away, that like that might be good enough? Or washing your dishes as a meditation? Like, where are you on the spectrum of what meditation is and how people can integrate it into their lives?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, first of all, I think people should try different meditation techniques. I liken it to food. You might not like broccoli, but that doesn't mean you don't like all food. You might like potato chips a lot. So, some meditation methods are like potato chips, meaning they immediately feel fantastic. And I'd suggest somebody starting meditation should start with a technique that is easy for them. On my website, awarenessexplorers.com, in the navigation bar, there's a word meditations. And when I interview people like, Adyashanti or Byron Katie or Deepak Chopra, I say, give me your best 10-minute guided meditation, the one that knocks people's socks off. So I now have like 90 of those on that website, and they're all free. And, try this, try that, see what works for you. That would be my first piece of advice, because there's a lot of different meditation styles that do different things. My current favorite is I made a list of everybody I love have loved in my life, and I spend 1 minute just sending them love and thinking how much I appreciate something about them. So I bathe myself in love for an hour, and nothing's more fun than that. So, that can be a meditation or a mantra meditation or a breath meditation. They all do very different things. The most important thing is your mission, should you decide to accept it, is to find something that feels right for you, that helps quiet your mind and open your heart. And if you experiment, you'll find something like that. Then there's the other thing, which is how to bring that peace into daily life. And in the Enlightenment Project book, I talk about meditation methods that you can do while talking, like I'm doing a method right now, or walking to your car, doing dishes. And most people don't know those methods. So I think that's really valuable because, you can only meditate a little bit each day, but if you can make use of your daily life activities as a form of quieting, then you get to experience a lot more peace.
Yeah, that piece is really critical. I think when I went on my journey, I think I was very surprised how much peace I encountered on the way without even knowing that's kind of what I needed. I sort of like bumped into peace by default. I was coming at it from a different angle, but having the consciousness and presence of mind just allows for, I think, inherently a lot of peace. And like you said, if you are, I think, coming to any practice, whether it's spirit medicine or meditation, like you said, with that sincere intention, my first Swami that I met at that yoga ashram would always say that as well. Like it's really more about how you're showing up with that loving, sincere energy about being present and giving of yourself to this thing so that you can, be integrated into this beautiful human experience in this really peaceful way. So I love that you said that.
One of my favorite meditation quote methods I do in daily life has a funny story attached. When I interviewed a lot of spiritual teachers, a lot of them said that gratitude was a real key for connecting with the divine and higher consciousness. So a friend of mine came back from India and he looked totally lit up. So I asked him, what went on in India? And he said, well, my guru gave me this magical mantra that I can use anytime during the day that taps me into profound gratitude. So, I asked him what the mantra was, and he said, well, you'll have to go to India and get it directly from the guru. Have you been to India, Krista? It sounds like you have.
No.
Oh, and you haven't?
No,
okay.
I wish. No, I'm dying to go. I have not made it out there yet.
So, I travel all the way to India, 20,000 miles, and then I take a rickshaw for 4 hours, and then I have to wait 3 hours in line to talk to this guy to get this, friggin' mantra. So I finally talked to him and I say, I'd like to get this mantra for feeling overwhelming gratitude. And in an Indian accent, he says, yes, my mantra is the most powerful mantra on earth. And he leans in to whisper in my ear. I'm very excited. And he says, whenever possible, to repeat these words. The mantra I give you are the words, thank you. I look at him, I go, that's it? I traveled 18,000 miles to get thank you, that's it? Well, he looks at me very sternly. He says, no. That's it is the mantra you have been using. That makes you feel like you never have enough. My mantra is thank you, not that's it. That's it will take you nowhere. So I'm totally pissed off. And I look at him and I say, well, thanks for nothing. And he looks at me, he says, thanks for nothing's not the mantra. You must say it from your heart. So when you eat good food, you say thank you. And when you see your child or a sunset or your pet, say thank you. And soon you will be filled with gratitude. And, I was still pissed off, but I figured I'll try it. So I leave the ashram, I get into a taxi, and the taxi has air conditioning. In India, it was like 105 degrees Fahrenheit. So I was like, oh, thank you for this air conditioning. And then I get to my hotel room and there's a clean bottle of water there. I go, thank you for this water. And then, I open up my computer. I'm thinking, wow, thank you for this amazing thing, this amazing machine. And then I Skype my wife and, I think, thank you for Skype. And I see my wife, I'm feeling my heart and saying thank you for my wife, and tears come to my eyes. And my wife says, wow, that must have been some mantra you got. And I said, you have no idea, and really it's a type of thing that's so easy to just feel your heart and sincerely say thank you to the universe for your legs, for your food, for your pet, for your arms, for Netflix, for everything. And little things like that throughout the day can make a huge difference in the quality of your life.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's really beautiful. That's funny. You went all the way over there and, and he told you that.
And
That's
you
a
just
great
got
story.
that magical mantra for free.
Oh,
So you should be
I
saying thank you.
know. No, I'm totally saying thank you right now. And I know everyone that's listening right now is saying thank you. The next thing I wanted to talk to you about, which I think can seem like separate topics, but I feel like they sort of lead to each other, is there's a chapter on spiritual materialism and then a different chapter about making money. I
Mm-hmm.
have heard a lot of stories on this podcast about people, being very identified once they get into their spiritual life. They think they have to like wear the white robes and just sort of levitate all over the earth before anything. And then they realize like they should give up all their belongings and try to be in a life of service. And it's not always coming from this very genuine or sincere place like we're talking about. So I wondered what your thoughts were on spiritual materialism, but then after you go on this practice and you realize maybe I don't want to have a corporate job. I really want to do something with the community that is spiritual or that gives people healing, through this modality like you do with your spirit medicine. How do we reconcile both of those things?
Yeah, those are big questions. I devote a fair amount of chapters to that in the Enlightenment Project because the answers are very specific and subtle. The Buddha taught what's called the middle way, which isn't indulgent hedonism, isn't live an ascetic life. It, try and live a normal life, but learn at an accelerated rate what leads to peace and harmony in your life. One of the potholes on the spiritual path can be that you develop what could be called a spiritual ego, or what Ram Dass called phony holy, where you're pretending that you're an enlightened being, but you're still, very ego based. And it's something that you really have to look out for, something I have to look out for, when I do these podcasts, that really it's your connection, conscious connection to spirit or awareness or love in this moment that determines how spiritual you are. It's not what you say or who people, who likes you. It's really, do you feel that connection to the loving presence right now? And if you're honest with yourself, you probably think, well, a lot of the time I don't. So, and that's true for me too. So we have to be honest with ourselves and not develop this phony ego that's, all spiritual. And then, trying to bring our peace and love into the world in a way that helps support us is a whole other area that I've been very lucky to have some success with. One of the things I've done is I've always asked myself when I meditate, how can I better serve people and make money at the same time? And, if you ask the right questions enough, you'll sometimes get a good answer. So, every day I ask that and I get feedback. I listen to the still small voice within. And sometimes I've gotten actually very direct feedback that has led to a lot of money. Like, I made one time a voice in my head said, take notes, and out came 200 questions. And then this book called Life's Big Questions was written like in a day. I got on the Oprah show twice for that one book. It became a New York Times bestseller, so I'm going to listen to that still small voice and try to follow in a sincere way. What can I do that helps people and also make me money? And, I think if you're persistent that way, something does show up.
Yeah, there's this idea too sometimes, and I found it interesting having grown up in kind of a culty religious community. The idea of money had a very negative connotation, and I found on the path too that I would encounter people in the realm of spirituality and they would feel like this too. It was weird to see those two sort of ideas perpetuating themselves in two different places, but it's like a necessity we all have, and we need to I don't know if you want to say anything else about this, but like removing that negative connotation around earning money too, I think is sometimes also hard for people to let go of when they're on this path, because they feel like they should be doing a lot but maybe not charging a lot, or like, do you know what I mean? Like there's just this weird reconciliation that I think a lot of listeners that write in and ask me things like this, and some of the people that come to the podcast, if there's a simplification of getting to that like inner, like you said, that inner space where you feel aligned in what you're doing but also still supporting yourself financially, because we all have to.
Yeah, well, one exercise I did when because I was living in a van in my 20s and didn't have any money, and then I realized a lot of the things I want to do in the world require money, whether it be take workshops workshops or help certain groups of people, they required money. So I changed my beliefs about money, because I used to think that, money just makes you selfish and whatever. So I wrote down, if I had an extra $10,000, this is what I would do with it. And it included things like, take a certain retreat and visit a certain teacher and take a certain workshop. And then I'd give, $2,000 to the homeless in the city. And then I would spend, $1,000 on eating better. And so I wrote down things that my spiritual self really supported. So I've made a bunch of money, and I've been able to build a hospital in Thailand for Burmese refugees and a school in Turkey for Syrian refugees. And that feels really good. Money is just energy. Do you use the energy to ruin your life, hurt yourself, or do you use it to help yourself and other people? So as I started to make associations that money could be used in a way that benefited my spiritual life and benefited other people, I found that money actually came to me. And, that was nice.
That is nice. Yeah. I love removing that pressure and that, the shoulding of what we think we should be doing, I think is great. A couple more questions, because we're getting towards the end here, and I just want to pick your brain about everything. Towards the end of the book, there is a section on enlightenment and being enlightened. And this is a big word, and it gets thrown around a lot, and there's a lot of ideas of what it is, especially in our modern world. And if someone's picking up this book and they're trying to understand from your perspective, what is enlightenment for you, and what are your thoughts on being someone who is enlightened in this very interesting world that we live in today?
Well, enlightenment, think of it that there's many levels, from you have a little bit of peace most of the time, to that you have so much peace that you can barely realize that you're in a body. There's various levels of it. And we tend to think that enlightened people are perfect human beings, but they're not. They just have a persistent way of being in the world without the ego limitations that most people have. Adyashanti called it, you perceive without the lens of the ego there. And I think most of us have had enlightening moments in our life, maybe just being there watching a sunset, or making love with someone, or just loving our pet, and just that being totally present in that moment as a being of love, loving someone else. So it's not that's that unique an experience, but it's unique in that some people experience that almost all the time or all the time, and some people, once every 10 years. Yeah. So, it's available. And with some of the great methods out there now, it's more available. In fact, one of my missions is to put out these great methods that are very powerful. And part of my mission is to give them out to millions of people. So I give out most of these methods for free. And people can go to my website, which is the enlightenmentproject.net, and put in their email address, and I will give them, I send them for free the first chapter of the book, the 5 quickest ways I know to awaken, and an ebook of that, and an audio meditation that guides them through these 5 methods. So I think as people learn to tap into this peace and love and awakening more quickly, that it really benefits not just them, but everybody they know. So hopefully people will benefit and get those 5 methods at theenlightenmentproject.net.
Yeah, for sure. We'll put it in the show notes for sure. And thank you for saying that. I think when I heard the term enlightenment for the first time, obviously reading the text of the Buddha, I always thought it was such a big, big word. And as I started to experience these, I would say these micro moments of enlightenment that you just alluded to as well, was really profound and life-changing in a way that I don't think I even have words for even today. And I think that it helps us, I believe, expand and become more in tune with who we are as a person, and allows us also to be in tune with one another. Again, I know it's like, it sounds cheesy maybe to some people, but that's what I found on my journey too, is like it's almost like there's this enlightened empathy that happens as well, that I think is really beautiful along this process as well, that allows me to understand humanity better in understanding myself as well. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, you clarify your own mind, you purify it, your own heart, and then you're a better servant to, the force of love and peace.
That's exactly right. One other question I really wanted to ask you is, especially for all the sort of novice spiritual pathers that listen to this podcast, who are sort of in the, I would say, like maybe their undergraduate studies of awakening and becoming enlightened and reading all the texts and encountering all the gurus that you've had the luxury of meeting. When would you say does somebody know that the student has now become the teacher? This is a question I often get asked and get bumped into with people who are like, I know all these things, I feel ready to share them, I want to take my own knowledge out into the world and teach people through my own methodology or my own process, and then they get a little nervous to become the teacher. So for you in your life, what was that process like, and what advice do you have for people trying to discern whether they're ready to teach in this life?
Well, rather than think of it as there's teachers and students, I think of it that we're all teachers of something. It might be that you're a teacher to your friend of what not to eat, because it makes you sick, So what are you able to teach because you really know it? Like Krista, podcasting. You could teach that. You don't have to be known as the great teacher of podcasting. You just know it. If people ask you for help with that, you can teach that. And the same is true for everybody. If someone I know who doesn't think of themselves as a teacher at all is the kindest person I know, to me, she's a teacher. I'm learning how to open my heart because she's so kind and beautiful in that way. She's not into spirituality at all, according to her. But to me, she is my teacher of kindness and heart opening. So the question is really, what is so fundamental to you that people are already coming to you and asking, wow, how do you meditate so well? Or how is it that you're so kind? Or how is it that you have such great relationships? Or how is it that you are able to tune into God? It should be evident to you and the people you know that there are things that you can teach, and you have a responsibility to teach them, because not everybody has that particular gift.
I think that's a really good way to see the pointer. I think that's really wonderful. And I feel like our calling becomes really clear when other people can see it in us. So I love that you said that.
Mm-hmm. I didn't know I could write, but somebody told me every time you write something, it's really clear. You should write something. I said, okay, I'll give it a shot.
And boy, did you write!
So that's how.
Then you just never stopped writing.
I guess I never stopped. Yeah, it came easy.
Yeah, it's wonderful. No, your writing is very concise and orderly and flows really beautifully. And it feels like, I guess because I've known your work before, but I was hearing your voice while I was reading it, and it's sort of like the tempo was there or something. I don't know how to explain it.
People tell me that. It sounds like how I speak pretty much.
Right. So it's like it felt fast too, because you're quick on your feet with your words and all of your ideas and stuff. So I felt like that's how the book was as well.
Thank you for those kind words.
Yeah, I did want to ask if there's anything else that we haven't touched on that's important for you to share with the listening audience, or anything that we didn't get to that you really want to talk about, or anything that is kind of in your heart space.
Well, I end with a quick story, which had a very powerful impact on me. I was visiting a guru in India named Punjaji, and when I got to his ashram, he pointed to me to sit right in front of him. And he, a big bald head guy, and he got really close to me, and he looked at me and he said, "Who are you?" And I didn't know what the protocol was. So I said, I'm Jonathan Robinson from the United States. And he and the other people in the ashram, about 50 people, just started laughing. They thought that was the funniest answer. And I thought, well, that was the wrong answer. So, no, he said, well, no, who are you really? And I said, well, I'm a spiritual seeker. And he kind of shook his head no. I said, I'm a man, and he shook his head no. And I said, I'm a psychotherapist. He shook his head no. I'm an author. I went through all these roles. Finally, I ran out of roles that I identify with, and I just sat there silently looking in his eyes. And as I did that, what happened surprised me, that it felt like a wave of love just crashed over me that was so strong that I just started spontaneously weeping. And I was in this state of like total love and bliss. And as I'm crying in his lap, he taps me on the head and he says, I get moved from this. He said, "This love is who you are, and your job in life is to get back to it." And that's really stayed with me, that, we're all identified with different roles, but we are love. We are this part of this universe, and our job is to find our way back to that.
And a lot of that too is the love that we feel for ourselves. I think we go on this journey looking to feel that externally, and then we realize there's this well of internal love that is parsed out just for us when we come into this human experience, that gives us strength and resiliency and compassion and empathy for the world around us. And I think coming into contact of that love, like you just did, and many people do on this path, is forever life changing. You can't touch that love and be the same person, basically.
Yeah, then you have a real hope that, no matter what's going on Channel 2 with the crap show of daily life and the world situation, that there's a refuge inside yourself that's Channel 1. And when you can contact that consistently and easily, then you're really the most help to the people you care about, and a good servant to the world.
Yeah. I love that. Like a refuge, like the Buddha, the Sangha.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, wrapping it up, where can everyone reach you? We'll put your website in that you mentioned earlier, but where do you hang out online? Where can people find you?
Well, I'm on Facebook, and let's see, where am I online? Most people reach me. Most people reach me through my website. My email, if people want to reach me, is iamjonr@aol.com. iamjonr@aol.com. And I really encourage people to go to the enlightenmentproject.net and get those downloads for free, because I think those can really help people. And they'll also get the first chapter of the book for free. Those are all ways to connect with me.
Okay, that's wonderful. And then since we did talk about gratitude and this beautiful mantra that Guru gave you, I do always end in gratitude on this show, because it feels so important to me to end on a high note, although we're never on a low note. So I always ask my guests, like, what 3 things are you grateful for in this moment?
Well, I'm grateful that I get to speak about these things. As you speak about them, they tend to become very part of your consciousness. So I encourage people to talk to their friends about it, to read books about it, to just inundate your life with it. And I get to do it. So I'm grateful for that. I'm really grateful for my dogs. They're my gurus. I get to love them and pour love onto them and them onto me. And, I'm grateful that I have a body in this world, that we get to play. We are beings of another dimension of love, but we get to play in the material world for a while. Yeah. And that's a great honor. And I'm grateful for that.
That is wonderful. Thank you for all of those. And thank you for coming to do this show. I'm really grateful that I got the opportunity to talk to you, and that you've created such a beautiful library in and of yourself, basically, of all of your experiences, and that you continue to want to share your work and this work with the world, because we desperately need it. So I'm really grateful for you being here today and sharing your work with us.
Thank you. Thanks for what you do, Krista. You're affecting a lot of people, and you're doing a great job of it.
Thank you. That's so sweet. Well, I had a wonderful time with you today, Jonathan, and I'm really grateful I got to meet you, albeit virtually. Now I can say I met you.
My pleasure, Krista.
Yeah. All right. You have a wonderful day. This podcast was written, directed, and produced by me, your host, Krista Xiomara, in alignment with LightCasting. Music curated and created by Mr. Pixie. You can find I'm Awake Now What on all social media channels by searching IANW Podcast. Head over to your favorite podcast app and subscribe, download, rate, and review. Come back every Sunday to partake in a new and enlightening conversation. May you be filled with love and light until we meet again.